An old-fashioned airshow in a delightful rural setting. This episode, we make our 5th visit to the Midlands Air Festival, held in the gardens of the Ragley Hall estate, for a show that had something for everyone. Hello, welcome to another episode of Airshow Dispatches, this time coming to you once again from Ragley Hall in Ulster, always a firm favourite of mine. And this is an event that encompasses all sides of aviation. It's not just a conventional powered display, there's also models, there's hot air balloons, there's fireworks and various other attractions around the showground as well. That being said, in this video we'll be focusing on the main afternoon flying displays. Let's take a look at the lineup and running order. We start with the RAF contingent, Reds, BBMF, Typhoon and Tutor. That includes the joint Typhoon and Lancaster formation display. Then we've got the piston warbirds leading into our light entertainment acts, barnstorming displays, followed by a variety of solo and formation aerobatics. Some Cold War era warbirds are coming up towards the end, including a brief appearance by the Saab Draken of the Swedish Air Force historic flight. The Falcons parachute team conclude the lineup. First to display, a much improved RAF Red Arrows, this year flying 8 aircraft. This is their first official public performance of 2023. They did perform at one event in Croatia in May, but that was technically part of their spring training deployment and not an official display. The team is still recovering from a torrid season in 2022 plagued by poor aircraft reliability, the dismissal of 2 pilots, the resignation of another, and a 4th having to step back due to injury. As a result, they flew just 7 aircraft for most of the last season and ended with just 6. It wasn't just a reduced formation though, it was also a shorter, simpler display that was not really befitting of the high standards we expect from the Red Arrows. Well, thankfully that has all changed, with a sequence that is, in most respects, pretty close to what we enjoyed back in 2021. They haven't quite been able to get back up to a 9 ship, that's because the number of new pilots each year is capped at 3, and with only 5 existing pilots staying with the team, 8 was the largest number they could muster. The cap on new pilots is because all the newbies fly in Enid formation, the front 5, who fly the simpler manoeuvres. Red 1 himself is the team leader, and either Red 5 or 4 is required to be a second-year pilot, and his job is to supervise the rookies. So that only leaves 3 spots for the new recruits. But it's interesting, isn't it, how small changes can make a big difference. The jump from 7 to 8 aircraft has had a disproportionate effect on the amount of stage presence that the team has. The quality of the flying has improved also. We're not seeing nearly so many of those little errors that kept creeping in last season. Now the crowd favourite Tornado. A little bit less use of coloured smoke in the first half of the display this year, and this is one of the manoeuvres that has suffered as a result of that, although we do see a bit more coloured smoke in the second half instead. We've talked about Enid formation, but the other half of the team has also gone through a big change this year. Reds 6 to 9 are normally known as Jippo, the nickname of the first pilot to lead that particular part of the team. This year they've been renamed to Hannah in memory of the legendary Ray Hannah from New Zealand. Did a huge amount for the airshow scene. He flew for 3 of the RAF's aerobatic teams, including being a founding member of the Red Arrows. He flew with the Reds for 5 years and was the team leader for 4 of those years, making him, to this day, the longest serving Red 1. It was also under his leadership that the Reds became a 9-ship team. A familiar manoeuvre here called Python, usually flown with 5 jets, but this year being flown with 6 for the first time. They did attempt this in pre-season training back in 2021, but it didn't work out that year. There just wasn't quite enough time in the 2021 display routine for Red 8 to chase down the rest of the formation and join up with them safely. It's still a relatively simple sequence overall by Red Arrow standards, minimal differences between the full flat and rolling displays, no particularly complex formation changes and not much experimentation going on. But it is nice to see the return of this manoeuvre, the vertical brake, which hasn't been part of the show since 2019. Lovely to see it being performed with coloured smoke for the first time in quite a few years. Final manoeuvre coming up, ending the Red Arrows' first show of the year, and it is once again the Infinity Break. Another act that's always very popular with the punters is the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight. They've been out and about performing flypasts for a few weeks now, but this is one of their first official full displays of the season. Actually, we got very lucky with the BBMF over the course of the weekend. 5 different types of displays over 3 days. What you're seeing here is clips of their traditional 3-ship performance, which took place on the Friday. On Friday we also had a Typhoon and Lancaster 2-ship display. On Saturday it was a Lancaster solo and a two-ship fighter tail chase, and then on Sunday we had a solo display by the Hurricane. So now some Saturday footage, with the two fighters performing a relatively restrained two-ship tail chase. The Spitfire being used on this occasion is Mark 5B AB910, which was used on active duty to provide cover for bombing missions, as well as serving as an escort fighter and performing convoy patrols during the Second World War. It's flying with Hurricane Mark 2C PZ865, although it's painted to represent a night fighter Hurricane based at Predannock in Cornwall. A matte black paint scheme with low visibility roundels. These two-ship displays aren't seen very often, and it only occurred at the Midlands Air Festival because the Lancaster encountered a technical problem and was late to arrive. It was actually touch and go whether the Lancaster would make it at all, but the BBMF's engineering team moved mountains at Coningsby to get the aircraft into the air, and it did arrive overhead a couple of hours later. In addition to Saturday's solo display, the Lancaster also debuted its new two-ship sequence with the RAF Typhoon Display team on the Friday. This two-ship formation will be flown at several of the UK's largest air shows of the year, marking 80 years since the Dambusters raid. Is at best tenuously relevant to the anniversary. You'd think a 617 Squadron F-35 would be far more appropriate for this formation, but we've got to take whatever small pleasures we can from the modern day RAF. A stunning opposition break. The Typhoon commences its full solo display. This is the public debut of the incoming display pilot, Flight Lieutenant Matt Brighty. He's flying the familiar blackjack liveried special scheme display jet. Each year's Typhoon display pilot designs their own routine from a collection of about 24 pre-approved manoeuvres. This year's sequence is, to me, not one of the very best. There's a big emphasis on speed over agility, with quite a few flat, fast passes, during which not a huge amount happens. Being said, there are a few little treats. Here we see the Typhoon performing a slow roll. That's a manoeuvre I can't recall ever having seen from a British fastjet solo display before. I'm sure it has happened at some point, but not for at least the last 5 years or so. There's a good amount of energy on crowd action this year also. Some lovely diving aileron rolls on the intermediate display lines at some points, and also the high alpha pass is being performed on the left 45-degree line, as you can see here. According to Eurofighter, the aircraft can fly at in excess of 30 degrees of alpha, although software limits likely limit the angle of attack to the low to mid 20s in order to prevent the jet from approaching the edge of the flight envelope. And here, demonstrating the power of those twin EJ200 engines by accelerating from that slow pass into a loop. Not the most visually exciting spectacle, but it's technically very impressive, and not something I can recall seeing the Typhoon do in recent seasons. Final pass now, rounding out a slightly shortened display. That's due to a lack of fuel. One more 2023 debut from the Royal Air Force now, and it's the first show of the year for Flight Lieutenant DJ Gibbs, who's commencing his second and final year as the Tutor Display pilot. He, like all of the military pilots, is not allowed to make tweaks to his display routine mid-season, but over the winter he's been able to apply some of the lessons learned last year to prepare a modified and slightly longer display sequence. One of the big changes, he's now cleared down to 300 feet, which is 200 feet lower than last year. So he's starting the show at about 700 feet with some high energy vertical manoeuvres, burning through some height and working down to that 300 foot limit by around the halfway point of the show. Then the last manoeuvres are predominantly energy neutral rolling manoeuvres, and they're all performed in that 300 to 400 foot range. There's a little bit more RAF action coming up at the end of the programme, but now it's time for our first batch of Warbirds, and we'll be looking at all of the piston Warbirds in this segment. Here, a relatively rare airshow appearance by C-47 Dragamute, owned by Warbird experience flight company Aero Legends. She served with the US Army Air Force during the Second World War, based initially at Greenham Common in the UK, and she was kitted out with a glider retrieval system, hence the nickname Dragamute. So what is glider retrieval? Well, one way of transporting troops into battlefields in World War II was to put them in large passenger-carrying gliders, tow them to the area of hostilities, and then release the glider in the hope that everyone would survive the landing unscathed. To pick these gliders up either before or after an operation, Dakotas like this one were fitted with a winch and a grappling hook. They would overfly the glider, trailing that hook, catch onto a tow rope that was suspended between two poles, and haul the glider into the air. It's actually a very similar technique to the one used to pick up banners in aerial advertising today, but with a few extra layers of complexity to reduce the G-force that the glider would experience in the first 5 or 6 seconds of the tow. Two aircraft now from the Rolls-Royce Historic Flight. We're seeing both of them out and about an awful lot at airshows these days. Should be no surprise really, because these displays are very heavily subsidised by Rolls-Royce. They don't just bring the aircraft, but also their STEM exhibition, intended to help reduce the shortage of engineers in the UK. This is their Spitfire PR-19, which started out in life as a photo reconnaissance platform involved in the liberation of mainland Europe. Post-war, it became a meteorological research platform before then becoming a founding member of the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, or the Historic Aircraft Flight, as it was then known. And here is their P-51D Mustang Warhorse. Unfortunately, Rolls-Royce display pilots don't currently have the display authorisations required to present these two aircraft in formation. They instead fly back-to-back solo displays. Although the silver lining there with back-to-back solos is that it gives a very good chance to hear the difference between the Rolls-Royce Griffon and the Merlin. The Spitfire we just saw, being a late model example, was fitted with a Griffon, of course. They're usually very nice solo displays, the Mustang especially, with plenty of fast topside passes showing off that paint scheme very nicely. It's the colour scheme of Colonel Don Blakesley's personal aircraft. He was a combat ace who flew more missions against the Luftwaffe than any other American pilot in the Second World War. Midlands Air Festival has always done a very good job of attracting one or two real Warbird rarities to the lineup. I remember particularly their first show in 2018, which featured the UK debut of newly imported P-47D Thunderbolt Nelly. Well, this year's piston Warbird highlight is of a similar calibre. It's the F8F-2P Bearcat of the Fighter Collection. This is the only Bearcat airworthy outside North America. She was built in 1948 and served with the US Navy up until retirement in 1957. It joined the Fighter Collection in 1981 and is the longest serving member of their fleet. But it remains a relatively elusive sight. It usually flies several times per year in air displays at its home base of Duxford, but it very rarely ventures further afield than that. The Bearcat was Grumman's last single-engine piston fighter. It was designed as a carrier-based fighter for the Second World War, but entered service too late to see combat use in that conflict. It was relatively lightly armed, but very manoeuvrable, very fast, and it climbed well too, and hence it was chosen as the second aircraft type to equip the Blue Angels. On to some of the lighter types now, but still very much a Warbird, Kevin Hale's Oster AOP-6. It entered service at the tail end of the Second World War. It flew in the observation role, similar to the L4 Grasshopper or Fiesler Storch, and like those platforms, it has very good visibility from the cockpit, excellent low-speed handling, and a very tight turning circle, allowing its crew an unsurpassed view of the ground below. The observer in the AOP-6 actually sat in the rear cockpit facing backwards, with large windows on all four sides. Kevin is a Midlands Air Festival regular, and I believe he's one of only two pilots to have flown at every single edition of the show, the other being Tim Dews, who we'll see later on. A trio of Stomps next, and we're still sort of with the Warbird theme, because the SV4 Stomp was used by the French and Belgian militaries as a training platform. That French military connection is a relevant point in 2023 because this year marks the official 70th anniversary of the Patrouille de France. While the Patrouille de France never actually flew the Stomp, the unit that currently bears that name certainly did. That was when they were known as the Patrouille de Temps back in the late 40s and early 50s. Incidentally, we will be seeing the Patrouille de France later this year on Airshow dispatches when we make our now traditional trip to Air Legend in September. The team we're watching now is the Stomp formation team based at Headcorn here in the UK. And after that formation sequence, a solo display of basic aerobatics. This is one of the delightful things about the Midlands Air Festival. It's not all about high power, high adrenaline excitement. There's a lot of gentle but extremely watchable light entertainment. The rural venue in the gardens of Ragley Hall does lend itself very nicely to this kind of performance. It's very much like how a small air show would have been back in the 1970s and 80s. And as part of that slightly retro feel, there's always a good dose of barnstorming at the Midlands Air Festival. Here we see the Aero Superbatics Wingwalkers. They're a team established back in 1986 by Vic Norman with the aim of resurrecting that post-war barnstorming era. They've since displayed in 20 countries all over the world, as far afield as China and Australia. Incidentally, one of the commentators at the Midlands Air Festival, who you might have been able to hear in the background at times, was Helen Tempest, and she was one of the original Wingwalkers from back when the team was founded in 1986. Now something of British airshow royalty. Four Drewine D31 Turbulents now, and a real crowd favourite act, the Turb team.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for you to pick your favourite. The yellow and white, the yellow with the red stripe, or the red one. I think I'm going with the yellow.
And do look carefully at these diminutive fabric-covered aircraft, especially Golf Alpha Sierra Sierra Yankee. That's the yellow and white Turb flying in the number 2 position. As the sun shines through the fabric on the wing there, you can actually see the skeleton of spars and ribs that make up the structure of the wing. We've seen the Turb team so many times at air shows. They're the oldest display team in Britain and probably the oldest civilian display team in the world, having been formed back in 1959. One gets the impression that they haven't changed an awful lot since then. It's proper old school airshow entertainment this, and my favourite part just has to be the limbo flying. But that's not all, there's balloon popping and flower bombing as well. The team has been the first step into the airshow world for so many pilots. A good number of well-known Warbird display pilots on the circuit today started out with a Turbulent team, as did Bob Grimstead, who we'll be seeing very shortly. Speaking of new pilots, here is a brand new act called Team Mono, crewed by a 21-year-old and a 22-year-old, probably the youngest display pilots in the world. Their aim for next season is to introduce some barnstorming elements like balloon popping and flower bombing, but this year they're keeping things very simple. Watching a new display pilot, you don't want to be excited, you want to merely see a controlled and sensible display. That's certainly what we got from Team Mono. The pilots are Bruce Buglas and Ben Gilmore, both of whom work on the airfield at Sleep. Both of them are making their airshow debuts here at the Midlands Air Festival. Both pilots safely back on the ground after a very encouraging debut display, and it was lovely to see their counterparts from all the other teams at the show were immediately on hand to congratulate them. Great to have such young faces on the circuit, and I think it's the first time I've watched an air display by someone younger than I am. I'm used to being the youngest person in the room by 20 years, so this is a bit of a novelty for me. But now a very experienced hand, as Bob Grimstead takes to the air in his Fournier RF4D. Bob calls this aerobatics for peanuts, because thanks to the RF4's tiny 39 horsepower engine, this entire flight probably only cost about £10 in fuel. It was touch and go whether Bob would make it to the show. He's been in Australia for several years, keeping in practice with a second Fournier that he has based out there. Meanwhile, his British Fournier has just had its wings reskinned. That, combined with paperwork delays, meant that the aircraft didn't even fly until a few days prior to the Midlands Air Festival, and he renewed his display authorisation on the Thursday. He then arrived at the show on Friday and performed this display on Sunday, and very nice it was too. His first British Airshow appearance since 2019, in fact. That's the end of our vintage airshow segment, and we're going to look very briefly at a couple of modern touring aircraft before heading back over to the Warbirds. The Midlands Air Festival once again hosted Peter Davis presenting the Rotorsport Calidus Autogyro. He's a very common sight on the British airshow circuit. Horsepower Rotax 912 engine providing forward thrust, propelling the aircraft to a top speed just shy of 100 knots. Lift is provided by the unpowered two-bladed rotor above the fuselage, which is in a constant state of auto-rotation. Now Peter demonstrates a very impressive hook landing, touching down in almost no distance at all.
A high speed run. How manoeuvrable is that?
And landing off the turn.
Yep.
Very impressive, well done.
Something a bit more sedate now from father and son duo Tim and Tom Dews in their Grob 109Bs. This pair began displaying together in 2017. They specialise in nighttime pyrotechnic displays and fly predominantly at weddings and private events. You can book them yourself for as little as £2,500 for a two-ship pyro show. But they also do a number of public events every year as well. The operation is part of Tim's company Airborne Composites, an aircraft repair centre and maintenance company based at Warminster, which specialises in the Grob 109 as well as various types of glider. In place of pyrotechnics for their day shows, as you can see, they're using smoke canisters on the wingtips. They're controlled via the same 5-channel radio cueing system that also operates the pyro and LED lights used for their night shows. The final day of the Midlands Air Festival featured a display of unlimited aerobatics by Chris Bearcat in his Extra 300S. We've seen Chris several times before on this programme flying what he calls a little and large display, a choreographed sequence which saw him fly his full-size Extra at the same time as a remote control model, with both aircraft performing synchronised manoeuvres. But his solar displays are also very watchable, and all the more so in the context of the modern UK airshow circuit. Unlimited aerobatics from this class of aeroplane are becoming somewhat of a rarity. Now here comes my absolute favourite, Team Raven. This, I would argue, is one of the most complete, varied and tightly choreographed sequences of any civilian aerobatic team globally. Seriously, the design of this display sequence is on a par with many well-known military jet aerobatic teams. There is no dead time. As soon as one group of aircraft departs, another arrives. No gaps. If anything, the manoeuvres actually overlap with each other a lot of the time. You just don't know where to look. Team Raven is a Midlands Air Festival regular. This is actually their 4th consecutive appearance at the show. The original plan had been for the Yakovlevs to take their place this year with their quite brilliant 6-ship of Yak 50s and Yak 52s. Sadly, the Yakovlevs announced in early 2023 that they were ceasing their airshow activities with immediate effect. That was due to a combination of the ever-increasing bureaucratic challenge of running a large aerobatic team in the UK, and also the collapse post-COVID of some major business deals out in Asia, most notably a skytyping contract in Dubai. So, we didn't know it at the time, but last year's Airshow Dispatches episode from Air Legend featured the Yakovlevs' final ever airshow appearance. Do check that out if you haven't already given it a watch. I've been singing Team Raven's praises for years. And here comes a new manoeuvre for the 2023 season, a 4-ship opposition break. And a quarter clover now. The difficulty of rolling a large formation of RV8s cannot be underestimated. It's followed by a split on the downline. Now, probably the only time you'll see a 10-ship formation of aircraft at a British airshow this season, Team Raven joined up with the Gazelle Squadron for a mixed-type formation pass. This is something the two teams have been working on for over 2 years. They finally debuted it in 2022, but this is only the second event at which it's been performed. A lot of work went into designing the shape of the formation to make sure everyone had a good view of everyone else, but more importantly, to ensure the RV8s were well clear of the Gazelle's rotor downwash. And following that, we move into the Gazelle's 4-ship display routine. I've been looking forward so much to seeing the Gazelle Squadron 4-ship. After several years of preparation, they finally made their 4-ship public debut last season, but this is the first time I've been able to catch it myself. They are by far the largest civilian helicopter display team in the world, one of only a very small handful of helicopter display teams in Europe. Wasn't always this way. We used to have quite a number of them in Britain, most famously the Sharks and the Blue Eagles, both of which flew the Gazelle. Both of those teams were before my time. The Blue Eagles disbanded in 2010 and the Sharks in 1992, although one of these helicopters does still wear a Sharks colour scheme. The Gazelle was designed in France to meet French army requirements, but it was operated around the world by almost 30 nations, many of which still fly the type to this day. Not least the United Kingdom, who built the Gazelle under licence. It was formerly flown by the Royal Navy and Royal Air Force and is still operated by the British Army, making it one of only 2 aircraft types in history ever to have served with all 3 branches of the British military, the other being the de Havilland Chipmunk. We're going to stick with the Cold War era for the rest of the flying programme. Here is the Bronco demo team demonstrating its impressive short field capabilities. It was used primarily for observation and light attack, and indeed it's still used today by the Air Force of the Philippines in the counter-insurgency role. But this is an OV-10B, not a combat machine. The B variant Bronco was designed as a target tug for the West German Air Force. The cargo hold was filled with towing equipment, and the clamshell door was replaced with a perspex dome in which a winch operator would sit, facing rearwards. We'll see a Bronco that's been restored to look more like a conventional combat aircraft in a couple of weeks' time at Antidotum Airshow Leszno. In fact, we'll actually see that clamshell door and cargo area being put to good use with a group of French Air Force parachutists jumping out of it. So make sure you are subscribed to see that episode when it comes along. Germany replaced the Bronco in 1990 with a Pilatus PC-9, and this is one of two airframes that ended up in the custody of the Belgian-based Bronco demo team, the brainchild of Tony de Bruyne. They also operate a short Skyvan as a support aircraft and as a display aeroplane in its own right. Time now for a very rare airshow performer, Mark Hooton's Vampire T11, formerly based at Coventry but recently rehomed at Gloucester due to the impending closure of Coventry Airport. The T11 was the first mass-production training variant of the Vampire. It was developed as a private initiative by de Havilland rather than being produced in response to any specific requirement from the British military, but it was a gamble that paid off because it ended up being produced in large numbers. 526 were produced, followed by a further 200 or so built for the Royal Navy and the Royal Australian Navy, which were designated the T-22, T-33 and T-34. The cull of UK-based classic jets over the last 10 years or so means this is now the only British-based airworthy Vampire. It is becoming an ever greater challenge to maintain, so it's worth enjoying every possible opportunity to see it fly. It might not be around for an awful lot longer. But now, arguably, the highlight of the Midlands Air Festival 2023. It turned heads right across the country when it was announced. The headliner for Sunday's show, standing in for the Red Arrows and RAF Typhoon, it's the Swedish Air Force Historic Flight's J-35 Draken. It first flew in 1955, but it still looks like a vision of the future. The first mass-production double-delta design, the first fully supersonic aircraft to be designed in Western Europe, the first aircraft to be capable of performing the Cobra manoeuvre. Now, one of just two examples remaining airworthy worldwide, both of them operated by the Swedish Air Force Historic Flight, based with the Skaraborg wing. This is the UK debut of this particular Draken, And a real milestone moment for British airshows, the first display by the Swedish Air Force Historic Flight at an overland British airshow since everything changed in 2015. It is such a shame, therefore, that this long-awaited moment was cut short. A last-minute change of the aircraft's operating base combined with air traffic control delays en route to the show meant that it only had enough fuel for 3 passes. That being said, it was still genuinely a watershed moment, and as a result we will have more chances to enjoy the sight and sound of the Draken at UK airshows in future.
Can we see that we have definitely 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Come on, boys and girls, how many can you see? 7, 8, 9.
Taking place just after the conclusion of the main flying display, a parachute jump by the RAF Falcons. The Falcons, I would argue, are one of the most interesting parachute display teams on the circuit globally. They might not be the best known of the RAF's display teams, but they are deployed worldwide on a regular basis. This year alone, they will jump into airshows in the UK, Cyprus, Finland, Belgium, France, the United States, Switzerland and Slovakia. All that in just one season, so they do get out a lot. That being said, we don't actually see them very much at UK airshows. Parachute jumps by their very nature don't integrate very well with air displays. And they do take a solid 20-minute chunk out of the schedule during which no engines can run on the ground. They're a rather underused asset in the UK as a result, and most of their British displays are at non-aviation events like county shows, so it's lovely to see the Midlands Air Festival finding a way to fit them into the event after the conclusion of the main flying display.
This is the team's favourite manoeuvre, and this very dynamic formation again requires vast amounts of concentration and trust in one another. So as I mentioned,
following their demonstration, the team line up for their traditional salute. That's not everything that the Midlands Air Festival had to offer. There are night shows, remote control models, hot air balloons, fireworks and more. But that is where we leave the Midlands Air Festival behind, because it's time for me to hit the road and head to the next show. Next time, we're at Cosford with a triple headliner of national teams, Red Arrows, Royal Jordanian Falcons and Patrie Suisse. From me, Adam Landau, it's goodbye for now, but I'll see you again very soon indeed.